It was supposed to be an easy job. Walk in, grab anything that looked like it could sell, walk out. I guess you could say I'm sort of a repo man. Clients call me up, give me the address and what they want, and if the item is in satisfactory condition when I give it back to them, they fork over the cash. Most of the time I can pilfer anything else I take fancy to, but sometimes people want a discreet job. Grab whatever shit they want, leave anything else. Those jobs I charge a lot more for, and this was one of them. 6 a.m. Walked into the rendezvous point, a small Starbucks joint tucked away in a street corner. 15 minutes later, the client walks in. Old guy, balding, a sort of a dead look in his gray-blue eyes. He had bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept in quite a while. Probably why I was in a Starbucks and not down the alleyway like usual. So, the job? I asked. He awkwardly sat down. Straight to business then, he raised his eyebrows. Most hustlers fawn a bit beforehand, get the clients riled up. He's done this before then. Shit. No room for haggling. I'm not here to show off my junk. This is work, not the strip club. He laughed. Sounded like the guy had 15 different assortments of cancer. Right then, the job's an apartment in the city. Shady place. It's called the Yorker Brewery. The apartment number? You'll be looking out for apartment B5, third floor. He's currently the only one occupying the building, aside from the landlord. The others, they moved out due to noise complaints. What am I looking for? A little black gem. I think the guy keeps it in this hallway somewhere. Don't bring it back to me though. I don't have a use for it, nor do I want it. You can keep it if you like. I just need it out of his shithole. He took a pause, breathed heavily, and exploded into a series of coughs. I took a day to scout the place out and find a way in. I drove around until I found the place. It was the ugliest thing I had ever seen in my life. The outside wall was covered in graffiti and the sign was barely legible. I could tell without getting out of the car that I wouldn't be able to go in from the front door. There was no way I was walking up those stairs without the landlord confronting me. A man walked out of the building. He wore a navy blue hoodie and sweatpants and walked stiffly, as if he were dying from a terminal illness or something. I got out of the car and walked around the building. At the back was a rusty metal fire escape that ran down the back of the building like a decaying spinal cord. There was my way in. I could climb up the stairs, climb in through the window and ransack the place. Only problem was, I didn't know which room was which. Climbing up the stairs to the third floor, I peered in through the first window. I could faintly see through the dirt-caked glass the letters B1 in faded copper on the back of the front door. Going horizontally, I was able to find B5. My way in was covered. All I had to do now was break in tomorrow night. My break-in kit was fairly minimal. Black outfit with a black hoodie, a burlap sack I found to transport goods, a couple of lockpicks, and a baseball bat for protection. Most of you are probably calling me a scumbag or a subspecies of Homo erectus, but it was either stealing shit from people or the homeless shelter. I was back at the Yorker Brewery again. I climbed up the staircase, avoiding the steps that I remembered buckled and creaked under my weight. I reached the window and fit my fingers under the tiny crack. I was going to try to bust the lock open. Usually worked with windows like these. I pushed with all my weight and nearly fell inside. The Muppet left his window unlocked. I ducked in through the window and found myself in his living room. It was empty except for the sofa and the CRT television. My eyes widened and I took out my baseball bat as I saw a figure in the corner, hidden by the shadows. We stared at each other for a minute. I then realized that it was just a mannequin. Turned to face the window I entered. It was made of shiny plastic and completely black. What do you need a mannequin in your living room for? To my right was a hallway with 2 doors on either side. At the end of the hallway was the squat little nightstand, and on top, out in the open, was the gym. Little was an understatement. This thing was almost as big as my fist. Bent low, I progressed through the hallway. I reached one door and put my ear to it. Nothing. Did the same with the next one. The owner was in there, snoring and coughing loudly in his sleep. In another 5 minutes, I was ducking out the window with the gym in my sack. Even though it was bigger than I had expected, it still weighed more than it let on. It would be going somewhere safe in my house till I could find a buyer. Next morning, I was back at the Starbucks. The old man walked inside and handed me the cash and sat down with me to talk about the job. "Everything went well?" he asked. "Yeah, man. Walked in, walked out, took the gym with me," I replied. Good. Good. Where did you find it?" The guy looked at me dead in the eye. He looked healthier, as if he was getting more sleep than before. "Guy left it out in the open, right in the hallway, exactly like he said. He even left the window open. You wouldn't believe it." He chuckled. Even got up and laid his hand on my shoulder. "Well, thanks, son. You did me a mighty favor. Take care of yourself, alright?" I walked out of the Starbucks with more than $1,000 in my pocket, as well as the gym back at my place. The guy even bought me coffee, and I finished the last of it as I got back into the car. The next night, I got into bed and turned the light off. I was in a trance-like state for about 15 minutes before I was jolted awake by a shrill, continuous beep, like the aftermath of an explosion right beside your ear. I looked around my bedroom for the source, but I climbed back into bed empty-handed and tried to sleep, which I managed to around 1 a.m. The next few nights the noise increased steadily in volume, until on the third night I could identify it. It sounded like a young girl screaming, just screaming, forever. It got worse from then. Every night the sound would be there, looming over me, sending stabs of pain into my head. On the 10th night, the sound was so loud it sounded like it was coming from right beside my ear. I turned over to look. 10 seconds later, I was locking my room from the outside. It was the mannequin from the apartment. It had been stooping over me, peering into my eyes. There was a huge, gaping depression where its mouth should have been. The next 5 minutes, I stood outside my room, hyperventilating. The thing, still screaming, had begun to thump violently on my door, so hard that it rattled in its hinges. I didn't know what to do. I buried my face in my hands until I remembered the gym. I dashed downstairs into the basement to get to my vault, entered the code, and snatched the gym, and then, half naked, ran outside into my car. The thing had stopped thumping and sounded much closer. It had gotten out. I drove like the wind, crossing red lights and charging down one-way streets the wrong way till I got to the river. I parked close to the edge, took one final look at the fist-sized gem in my hand, and chucked it out the window, and didn't drive away until I heard the splash. When I got back to my house, the thing was gone. The bedroom door has been thrown clean off its hinges. The last 3 nights I've been utter bliss. 3 full nights of rest. This morning, I woke up feeling elated. I got up into a sitting position and froze. At the foot of my bed, arms outstretched and mouth wide open, making no sound, was the mannequin. At my feet lay the black gem. I've tried to break it. I've tried to lose it in different places. I even drove across 3 states to get rid of it. Nothing works. It just delays it. It appeared the only way to get rid of it was to have someone else take it. Please, if anything looks too good to be true, be cautious. Especially if it's breaking into someone's house, because you never know what might break out with you. I need to sleep. I'm a 21-year-old college student, living with his parents in his family home. Now when I say I live with my parents,
I mean that I live in the house that they own. My parents have recently started to travel, and I've spent the majority of the last 2 years outside of the country. When I turned 18, they sat me down and gave me a talk about how I had to become a man, and that they believed I was responsible enough to handle taking care of the house as they pursued their dream of seeing the world. It all sounded like a midlife crisis to me, but I encouraged them. They had always sacrificed so much for me as I grew up, so even though I'm not entirely comfortable living alone for extended periods of time, I deal with it as best as I can. Even from across the globe, they still manage to provide for me. They send me money for food, clothes, and books, and even help pay for my tuition. On top of that, they make sure the bills get paid, so that I don't end up having my lights and heat repossessed by the electric company. They stop in every once in a while, usually full of excitement and enthusiasm, and tell me all about the sights they've seen and the people they met. They last checked in about 2 weeks ago and explained that their next trip would be the longest they've embarked on so far. They said something about backpacking through a country I've never heard of, and not to expect to hear from them for at least a couple months. This time, they prepaid all of my expenses and thanked me for rewarding their trust by not trashing the house. Truthfully, I'm not the type to enjoy large parties fueled by a combination of alcohol and distance from unknowing parents. Not because it's beneath me, I've just been a quiet kid. Before they left, they presented me with a gift they'd picked up from a street vendor during their last trip. I opened it, and beneath the decorative paper was the last thing I'd ever have expected, a cornucopia. I was puzzled, but I thanked them and set the souvenir on a shelf in my room. Fall is my favorite time of year, so at the very least it'd make a great centerpiece for the Thanksgiving table. This morning, I was awoken by the sound of someone at my front door. I don't mean the lazy doorbell ring of a lethargic UPS worker who probably caused that damage to your package by throwing it. No, this was a forceful and determined knocking that woke me with a jolt, similar to that heart-stopping moment when you open your eyes and know immediately that you've overslept. I got out of bed as quickly as I could, and the police officer was already addressing me when I realized I hadn't grabbed a hat or made any attempt to change into presentable clothes. So there I stood, with wild hair, a skull t-shirt that was one of my most fashionable pieces at 15, and mismatched basketball shorts that hadn't seen the court in years. He spoke to me with a seriousness that you'd expect from a man who knocked like that.
Hello, I'm Officer McGinnis. Do you know this man?
He asked, as he motioned to someone sitting on the curb that separated what little lawn had survived the rainless summer from the street. I turned my head to get a better look. The man was wearing a dirty, heather gray hoodie that looked to be a full size too big, and was torn on the back right shoulder. It gave the impression that he'd spent at least a night or two stumbling through the woods at the park just across the street, losing battles with the thick, sharp bushes before finding a place to sleep. His jeans were equally filthy, with an entire back pocket missing that exposed underwear that were as soiled as you'd reluctantly imagine them to be. The summer months had not been kind to him, but I had certainly never seen this man in my life.
No, I don't, I replied. Is there a problem, officer? Well, I caught this man attempting to look into your side window, he answered. I was stopped at the red light at the corner and noticed him wedging himself behind your bushes, trying to peek in. I circled around, and when I noticed him trying to climb your back fence in the back, I decided to detain him. Can you come with me to get a look at his face?
A shiver went down my spine. The only window on the side of my house facing the front is my bedroom window. There's another window on the wall adjacent to it, but that one is only accessible from the backyard. I always keep my blinds closed, so there's no way he could have seen anything. But the thought that he was willing to do all of this in broad daylight, in front of a cop, made me extremely uneasy. I followed the officer out to the curb, and finally got to see the peeper's face. It was weathered and wrinkly beyond his age, no doubt a result of years of poverty and homelessness. Through his eyes, I could see a man whose dreams and aspirations had died many years before he decided to see what was on the other side of the glass that separated me from the crisp September air. "Would you like to press charges, sir?" the officer asked as he approached us. I thought for a moment. On one hand, this man was trespassing on my property, and I had no idea what his intentions were. Why was he trying to look in my front window, and why was he brazen enough to try to hop my fence without the cover of darkness? He was probably scoping out the property to plan a robbery, and I wanted him gone. Just as I was about to answer the officer, I glanced down at the would-be thief. His head was down, and I swear I saw a tear fall from his cheek. His hopelessness and desperation were nearly tangible. This guy probably hadn't eaten in days, and somehow I forgave him. "No," I responded. "I don't want to press any charges. I just think he needs some help, and I obviously would like him to stay away from my property." "That's fine. Get up, sir. I'm going to take you to a shelter on my way back to the station. It's across town, but you'll get food and a place to sleep there." As the officer uncuffed the strange man, a call came through over his radio. It sounded like code words, none of which I could understand, but it did seem important. He excused himself for a moment and walked to his car across the street. As he did, I felt a sudden force grab my arm uncomfortably tight. Startled, I snapped my head, and the homeless man was now standing, still clutching my arm. His eyes, which just moments before resembled a puppy who had been scolded for digging in the yard, now bore into mine with a hateful focus. Before I could say anything, he took over the short conversation. "I will get in there." He released me immediately and fell back into a slump on the curb. Officer McGinnis turned around and beckoned for him to get in the car. He got up and, without looking at me, walked over and calmly took a seat in the back of the cruiser. I stood there, dumbfounded, as the officer got in the driver's seat and started the engine. The sirens turned on, and I can only assume the officer was forced to respond to a call on the radio. As he began to drive away, I watched as the peeper slowly turned his head towards me, until our eyes met once again. This time, he grinned, which all too slowly grew into a dirty, yellow smile. His head was tilted back in laughter as the car sped away. I've spent the rest of the day feeling uneasy. I know I should have mentioned it to the officer, but in the moment it didn't even seem real. The way he'd gone from groveling to aggressive and back in an instant was strange enough, but the laughing? I'm not sure what my options are at this point, because I already agreed not to press any charges. I could call the police and report the suspicious behavior from the morning, but this guy was dropped off on the other side of town. There's no guarantee he stayed there once the officer left, but at the very least, it's pretty far away. Still, I really think I need to contact the police again. It's past midnight now, and I just decided to peek out my blinds before I go to sleep. My property is empty, but I can see something way off in the distance. Just at the edge of the tree line, across the street at the park, I can see a dark outline of a man in a hoodie. I'll provide an update soon, but for now, I need to go. I ended my post last night when I saw the motionless figure at the tree line across the street from my house. I remember gasping, dropping the blinds, and dialing 911 as quickly as I could. My hands were trembling as I lifted the blinds again, fully expecting his grotesque smile to be inches away from my face at the window, but instead, he remained exactly where I'd seen him. I continued to watch, all the while wondering if he could see me too. After what felt like an eternity, I saw blue lights up the main road, far off in the distance. But before I could sigh and feel safe as the authorities closed in, the guy had to pull one more trick out of his dirty sleeve. He ran. I don't mean the uncoordinated stumbling of a feeble, terrified would-be criminal desperately clinging on to freedom. I mean he sprinted, hugging the tree line for a good 30 yards before disappearing into the forest. By the time the police arrived, and I was able to speak to them, I sounded like a paranoid nutcase. I told them about my encounter in the morning, this time including the man's cryptic message and him grabbing my arm. But I could tell the cops were having a hard time believing that the same man was capable of outrunning 3 cruisers through the woods at a park. The woods are deep, but could be easily surrounded as the park itself has streets on all sides. As their skepticism about my reliability as a witness grew, I knew I couldn't mention how he ran. He was on all fours. His movements lacked any grace. It was like watching a 4-legged spider sprint across the floor to avoid an approaching shoe. But he was covering ground so quickly that I'd have missed him if I blinked. The police search turned up nothing, but what I came home to today has me looking for a new place to stay. I got home from work just around dusk today and settled into my usual routine. I fed my 2 cats, took a shower, and cooked myself some dinner, if you can call throwing together some sandwiches with a side of potato chips cooking. I did my absolute best to stay busy at work, trying desperately to keep my mind off of what I saw last night. I was getting tired, and once I'd finished eating, I knew I couldn't stall anymore. I had to find that note and let my parents know what was happening. I hated the thought of interrupting the trip, but I know I'm in way over my head now. I turned on the light at the top of the stairs, and it flicked 3 times like usual. My foot had already hit the top of the step when I saw a shadow cast by the 3rd flicker. Someone was down there, and they had positioned themselves around the corner, just out of sight. There must have been an unusual amount of time between the creak of my first step and what should have been my second, because in that instant that I recoiled back from the stairs, I saw the wrinkly side of a man's face slowly peeking around the corner. I slammed the door as quickly as I could, and with my heart beating out of my chest, I slid the deadbolt across. As I did, footsteps stormed up the stairs. I ran track in high school, and I missed beating the state record by 0.46 seconds. I frequently sprint up my stairs, sometimes pretending I'm a football player doing a tire drill or something. I say this because I know what a person sprinting up those stairs sounds like, but what I heard on the other side of the door was very different. The footsteps were so fast it sounded more like someone falling down the stairs. It lacked any rhythm, and worse than that, there were simply just too many. It sounded like each foot was hitting the same step twice. The wind was not completely out of me. He was in my house, and he had been for who knows how long. I imagined his face peering around my shower curtain instead, right through my doorway as I watched TV and ate. My terrifying daydream was swiftly interrupted by an eerily calm, yet demanding voice from the other side of the door. "Let me up there, Sonny. Just open the door. You have what we need, and we have it. I told you I'd get in, and I did. His voice was nasally, but the pitch was inconsistent. It would unexpectedly drop and return to normal during random syllables. Meanwhile, I felt like I was in a nightmare. I wanted to speak. Hell, I wanted to tell this guy to get the fuck out of my house. I wanted so desperately to say something, anything, but I couldn't muster a single sound. Suddenly, silence. A part of my brain, the same part that gets people killed in horror movies, actually thought about opening the door to see if anyone was still there. I changed my mind when the voice spoke one last cheerful message. We will wear your skin. The pitch dropped again at the word skin, and the same footsteps bounded down the stairs. I heard a series of crashes, and suddenly I was alone. Alone in the house. No men looking to kill me. Alone in the country. No parents here to protect me. And alone in my story. Because I know no one is going to believe any of this. I don't think I'm even dealing with a man anymore. But whatever this thing is, it made one thing perfectly clear. There are more of them. And they will be back sooner rather than later.